Hello, my name is Francis Sutton, and welcome to our presentation Strategic Supplier Diversification, a Term Reflection Report. Management of Supply Chains and Operations. This has been created by Alyssa, Ashley, and myself, Francis Sutton. Through this presentation, our group hopes to provide a thorough analysis of past and current supplier diversification strategies and offer a solution to ongoing sourcing issues. We plan to do that by first going through our personal reflections on operations as a whole, the problem in operation sourcing that we plan to address, historical examples of disruptions, supply chain strategies, our ideas for improvement, and our strategic recommendations.
My name is Alyssa Alexandre, and I would like to start off by sharing my three biggest takeaways from this class. Early on in the class, I thought it was super interesting to learn the differences between supply chain and operations management. Before this class, I thought that they were one and the same, but the reality is they are different. They're like two sides to one coin. While operations focuses more on the internal technical processes, supply chain focuses on the more complex relationships. This could be useful to know for my future career someday because I hope to be an entrepreneur. It will be essential for me to successfully build up internal processes, but then also understand how all of the external factors can contribute to my business as I build up relationships and connections to support my business. My second major takeaway is how amazing the supply chain truly is. It is a powerful force that makes our world go round, and yet at the same time, it's an extremely delicate system. This engine that drives the global economy is highly susceptible to even the butterfly effect. It's an art that requires mastery, because if one thing goes wrong, a chain reaction could occur that could lead to shortages, disruptions, or even a global shutdown. That's why I think it's very important to always respect the people who work in supply chain, because they are quite literally holding the world in their hands. My final takeaway is it's important for businesses and organizations to constantly conduct internal analyses of their supply chain and operations management systems. Doing this project has really hammered in the importance of choosing the right sourcing strategy for me. Simply understanding sourcing can lead to either a wildly successful business or it could lead to a catastrophe that could destroy an entire business empire. It's about balancing efficiency against the need for resilience and making the right decision for your specific situation.
The chapter that connects most with my line of work is Chapter 9, Customer Service Management. I work as a public servant, so serving others and giving excellent customer service are the most important parts of my job. I've been told before how thankful people are to speak with a person rather than a robot. We all understand why that human connection is so important. Even with humans, the message can be lost in translation, like the jewelry video we watched, so I can see why our citizens have a negative view on automation. We have a really great culture at the city that promotes exceeding our citizens' expectations. Our core values are hospitality, stewardship, and integrity. These values can be linked back to the customer expectations in our textbook, especially courtesy and security. Our perspective is a bit different than a business trying to achieve brand loyalty and revenue. Instead, we're trying to earn a feeling of camaraderie and security. I thought the model of customer satisfaction was an interesting tool for identifying points of disconnect between an organization and its customers. With the goal of identifying those disconnects, we recently started distributing door hangers with a QR code linked to a questionnaire in order to bridge the gap between what we think customers want and what they actually want. We're looking forward to analyzing their feedback. The other chapter that piqued my interest was Chapter 6, Managing Quality. Although I don't work in quality, my husband is a quality control inspector at Parker Hannifin Corporation. You might remember talking to him on our Zoom call. The reason I found it interesting is because my husband has talked about different concepts like Six Sigma, Kaizen, and ISO 9000 for years, and I had no idea what he was talking about until now. He was actually so excited to discuss the concepts I was learning. He's very passionate about quality and continuous improvement. His insights on manufacturing were really helpful to me during this whole class since I've never worked in manufacturing myself. The concept from the book that I found most interesting was total quality management approach. My husband has complained to me for years that when there's an issue, managers at Parker don't listen to the people that actually do the job and instead insist on making up new processes themselves. I told him about TQM and he said that's how it should be done, but that's not something he thinks Parker would ever get behind. I think that's unfortunate because if they took a holistic approach, everyone could be learning from each other and stay more focused on the goals of the company. Overall, I learned so much from this class. Thank you.
Hi again, Francis here. One of my biggest takeaways from this class is how operation decisions impact the entire business, not just supply chains. These decisions we make in operations affect cost, performance, and customer outcomes. Operations decisions affect more than product processes, as I previously believed. Another key takeaway is how many employees are affected by operational changes. When sourcing shifts, it impacts planning, workloads, and stability across the whole organization. Many different segments rely on operations decisions, and many different employees are affected, whether they know it came from operations or not. Through this course, I learned that in operations we can't work independently with just the sole focus on the product. We have to consider how it will be brought to market and handled afterward to get a full picture of success in operation processes. So, what is strategic sourcing? Strategic sourcing is a long term approach that aligns supplier decisions with business goals. It focuses on evaluating cost, quality, and reliability, not just price. It also requires companies to adjust based on global changes, meaning sourcing strategies are not static and they should be reevaluated over time to stay effective. So, why does strategic sourcing matter so much? Disruptions like pandemics, labor shortages, and infrastructure limits reduce supply and create uncertainty. These disruptions increase lead times and delay production, which throws off supply and demand. Lean and single sourcing systems increase this risk because there are no backups. Strategic sourcing suggests that we should solve this by improving flexibility, using multiple suppliers, and balancing efficiency with reliability. To dig further into the effects of sourcing and regionalization, we look at The Globalization Myth by Shannon K. O'Neill. Global trade has never been fully global. That's what she states in her arguments here. It is mostly operated within regions. The globalization myth is a critical take on how sourcing and regular deliveries have changed throughout the shift from regionalization to globalization and seemingly back again. Globalization increased efficiency but also created dependency and risk. Now there's a shift that it would seem back towards regional sourcing to improve that stability. This book makes the argument that diversification and regional strategies are more effective in today's environment. To get a better idea of the history of sourcing, we'll look at regionalism and globalization to get a good start here. Early supply chains focused on regional sourcing and nearby suppliers. This reduced transportation risk and improved coordination. It also allowed faster responses to disruption. The trade off was less global scale, but more stability. We did the best with what we could when we weren't really using mass transportation at the time. This is all pre World War II. So after World War II, sourcing shifted globally to reduce costs. This is introducing globalism now with industrial revolution in mind and things too. Business was growing and booming. Plus, we had maritime, with war, so after the war, everyone was trying to work together. Companies used trade agreements and offshoring to expand production. This increased efficiency, but it also created complex supply chains. The ones that we still sort of rely on now, the ones that haven't been broken. Dependence on distant suppliers made systems more vulnerable to disruption, as we'll see in the next few slides here.
Supply chain risks are unplanned events that affect the ability to source resources from different suppliers. We will look at a sampling of supply chain disruptions from the last few decades to see what types of disruptions occurred and how supply chains were affected. These examples demonstrate a variety of causes for disruption as well as varying magnitude of impact. We will start with 9/11. The attacks resulted in logistics challenges and uncertainty. In the time immediately after the attacks, air traffic was halted in response to the national security threat. These increased security protocols, along with heightened border security, led to shipping delays and overall strain on supply chain flow. The stock exchange closed from September 10th through 17th, 2001, causing financial uncertainty. This is only the third time in history this has happened: World War II, the Great Depression, and 9/11. This combination of financial and security unease inflicted strain on the economy. Hurricane Katrina, a Category 4 hurricane, demonstrated how a natural disaster could considerably affect logistics. Although the flooding that occurred during Hurricane Katrina caused a localized humanitarian crisis, it also affected the port of South Louisiana and the port of New Orleans, both critical links in global supply chains. The damage to the port of South Louisiana was particularly disruptive as it's the fifth largest port in the world and a key part of global operations. Along with damage that would take several months to repair, many of the port workers were displaced during the evacuation of the area, leaving port operations shorthanded. The collapse of the U.S. housing market caused economic instability that in turn led to restrictions on businesses' access to credit. This global financial crisis resulted in acute decline in global trade and widespread financial uncertainty. This gave rise to decreased demand for durable goods by weary consumers and sent a ripple effect across supply chains. The Tianjin port explosion demonstrated how much turmoil could result from an accident. The port damage caused by a hazardous materials explosion in a nearby warehouse resulted in extensive international trade disruption. Similar to the issues faced in Louisiana after Hurricane Katrina, the explosion, which occurred in Tianjin, China, damaged several ports and led to a bottleneck and considerable logistics issues. A positive outcome of the accident was increased safety and environmental regulations, although this led to restructuring of some port operations, resulting in delays during those adjustments, a beneficial trade-off. In a way that has never been seen before, widespread illness, COVID-19, caused astronomical labor disruptions that resulted in demand miscalculations. A combination of travel restrictions, including travel bans and work-from-home orders, affected logistics. Halted manufacturing caused by company shutdowns led to decreased product output, and an increase in e-commerce, up 43% from 2019, resulted in a significant increase in demand. This created an imbalance in supply and demand in many industries. The most recent disruption, and the one that is still evolving, is the IEEPA. Sparked by geopolitical changes, newly re-elected President of the United States, Donald Trump, imposed tariffs on imported goods in early 2025. This was done under the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, or IEEPA. The U.S. is the second largest exporter of goods, the largest exporter of services, and the largest importer of goods and services worldwide. The U.S. is a leading player in international trade, second only to China. These tariffs were implemented to correct the existing trade imbalance and also to use as leverage in negotiations with other countries. However, they subsequently caused increases in consumer prices for imports and changed buyers' spending patterns. The countries affected the most by this legislation are Canada, Mexico, and China, as they are the leading importers to the U.S. Initial tariff amounts were 25% on imports from Mexico, 25% on imports from Canada, and 10% on imports from China. What we learned from all of these disruptions is just how vulnerable supply chains are. The potential of disruptions causing bottlenecks and impeding supply chain flow is a real possibility that could occur at any time, creating delays and driving up cost. The cause of these disruptions can range from logistical issues to inaccurate demand forecasting to financial constraints. Supply managers select, procure, and manage goods and services for an organization. While sourcing, managers should keep quality, technology, sustainability, and overall cost in mind, while also maintaining good relationships with suppliers to mitigate supply chain risk and ensure availability of resources for on-time delivery. Effective supply management is exceedingly important for the performance of the business. Limited inputs lead to limited outputs, which lead to stock out and lost revenue. Where and how to source materials are the key decisions established by supply chain managers. They aim to decrease exposure to risk and promote supply chain resilience. Some examples of these decisions are insourcing versus outsourcing, regionalism versus globalization, and supplier diversification versus single source supplier. Some advantages of insourcing are protection of technology, no need to share critical technology or novel ideas with suppliers, no language barriers, fewer logistical risks since there's less movement of materials, fewer quality concerns with more control to make sure design and quality are up to the company's standards. Some advantages of outsourcing are fewer fixed assets needed, therefore less capital output, economies of scale or cost reduction on bulk orders, order flexibility or easier to change order capacity as demands change. And if you don't like what a supplier is producing, you can have them change what they're doing or change suppliers altogether. Some advantages of regionalism are less chance of logistical disruptions or bottlenecks, no tariffs if no borders are being crossed, lower transportation costs for shorter distances, fewer delays and faster delivery, encouraging sustainability by supporting local economy or ESG framework, ability to address quality concerns faster without having to travel, and fewer communication barriers. Some advantages of globalization are availability of more technology, economies of distance and cost reduction, possibility of labor costs that are less in other countries, and availability of raw materials not available domestically. Some advantages of supplier diversification are lower costs. Suppliers have to stay competitive since they know you use multiple suppliers, less risk of disruption caused by bottlenecks, shutdowns, labor shortages, etc., because you have other suppliers to choose from, and more options. More suppliers mean more products and service offerings. Some advantages of single supplier are lower costs from economies of scale, deeper relationships. You can form a partnership with the supplier to ensure fulfillment priority, and less administrative work, more simplified and streamlined ordering processes since you are only dealing with one supplier. To gain some real-world insight on supply issues and navigating solutions, we spoke to Karen Starkey, who has over 2 decades of experience at Parker Hannifin as a buyer planner. Parker Hannifin Corporation is a manufacturing company specializing in hydraulics and pneumatics. They are a Fortune 250 company that operates worldwide. Karen shared that COVID-19 was a total paradigm shift. Her most interesting takeaway was the need for creative thinking. When their primary Tier 1 suppliers failed, they had to resort to buying components on Amazon or eBay just to keep lines running. This experience proved that when formal supply chain fails, the manager's ability to resource quickly is the only thing that saves the day. She also said that they prefer to keep their number of suppliers low and limit diversifying in order to take advantage of economies of scale. In their eyes, it's a win-win for Parker from an expense perspective and for suppliers from a revenue perspective.
As we have seen from our historic analysis, modern supply chains are increasingly vulnerable to unpredicted shocks. We are entering a new phase of emerging shifts within the global economy, driven by growing tensions and instability in traditional global trade. Because of this, we propose a very simple solution. All businesses must take a moment to step back and assess their sourcing strategies comprehensively. What worked for them in the past may no longer protect their operations in tomorrow's changing economy of the future. To help businesses navigate this reassessment, our team has developed the Diversification Assessment Scorecard. This tool gives organizations a formal, quantifiable way to determine their ideal sourcing strategy. A business simply rates a specific component from 1 to 5 across 6 different dimensions. A score of 1 represents a low need for diversification, while a score of 5 signals a high need for diversification. Ultimately, this scorecard reveals if a company's current strategy is hurting them or if it fits their current needs, and it will recommend the best tailored approach possible. We didn't just pull these scorecard dimensions out of thin air. They are grounded in core operations management principles we learned this term. First is the risk complexity trade-off. Using too many suppliers makes a supply chain overly complex and costly to manage. But using too few leaves hyper-lean supply chains highly vulnerable to catastrophic stockouts during major disruptions, such as COVID-19-like events. Second is core competency protection. A company's most critical activities shouldn't be broadly diversified. Instead, they require strategic partnerships or insourcing to protect valuable intellectual property. The third is total cost of ownership. Peak efficiency isn't just about finding the lowest purchase price. It's about looking beyond that. You must look at elements such as transportation, inventory holdings, and the cost of poor quality to find the lowest total cost. The fourth is resilience through regionalism. It's important to anticipate new tariffs and geopolitical changes. Adopting approaches like nearshoring or reshoring can act as a form of diversification that can reduce both lead times and logistics costs. Finally, information as a buffer. Digital visibility through tools like the blockchain or the Internet of Things can act as a substitute for physical inventory, allowing companies to rapidly shift resources if a primary supplier fails. Creative thinking is critical. On this slide, we break down the exact 6 dimensions our scorecard uses to evaluate a component's sourcing strategy. We rank each of these on a scale from 1 being consolidated and 5 being diversified. First is supply risk. We look at whether a component has stable logistics with multiple transportation routes, scoring a 1, or if it faces critical risks, like frequent force majeure events and political instability, which would score a 5. Second is market complexity. A simple commodity with hundreds of suppliers scores a 1 because switching costs are near zero. But if you rely on a monopoly or oligopoly market with only 1 or 2 global suppliers, that scores a 5. Third is the strategic impact. We must ask the question, is this a standard non-critical part, like a generic bolt, which would be 1, or is this a proprietary component that defines your brand's core competency, which would be 5. Fourth, we measure the cost of disruption. A score of 1 means inventory is easily buffered and a 2-week delay goes unnoticed. A score of 5 means you have a fatal just-in-time dependency, where a 2-hour delay shuts down the entire assembly line and costs tens of thousands of dollars. Fifth is total category value, which compares low-spend items that have a small impact on the bottom line, which would have a score of 1, compared to a score of 5, which represents high-spend materials that dedicate to your overall profit margins. And finally, geopolitical exposure. 1 would be an environment of friendly domestic sourcing with 0 tariff risks. The contrast 5 would be against volatile regions facing heavy upcoming tariffs or trade barriers. By evaluating these 6 dimensions, we get a clear, quantifiable picture of where an organization is safe to consolidate and where it desperately needs to diversify. To make our scorecard measurable, we balance efficiency and resilience. The final score places your strategy into one of 4 buckets. A high score of 25 to 30 dictates high diversification, requiring multiple suppliers for critical items like semiconductor chips. A score of 18 to 24 suggests a more moderate diversification strategy, using dual sourcing for strategic partnerships. Conversely, a lower score of 10 to 17 recommends for targeted consolidation to leverage buying power for stable materials like steel. Finally, a score of 6 to 9 means minimal diversification, allowing you to safely single source routine items like office supplies. Now that you understand all of the different components, This is an actual example of what the scorecard would look like if a business was to use it. As you can see on the right is the actual scorecard itself, and the table on the left is the key to interpreting the scorecard once the business has filled it out. It's critical to remember that this scorecard yields different operational realities depending on the size of the business. For small businesses, diversifying is disproportionately challenging and costly due to the limited resources and smaller purchasing volumes. Medium businesses have enough volume to require risk mitigation, but must carefully balance this against increased administrative costs. Finally, large corporations have the capital infrastructure and massive purchasing volumes to fully leverage high diversification and global resilience. However, it's very important because each case can be unique for a business to be customized individually, and this is why our scorecard can work across all business sizes and dimensions. We didn't want our scorecard just to be a theoretical concept, so we tested its validity using real-world examples from our textbook. We ran two vastly different organizations through the assessment to see if the recommendations matched the proven strategies. For our high-scoring example, we evaluated Chipotle. Because their fresh ingredients are highly vulnerable to disruption, they scored a 25 out of 30, correctly triggering a high diversification recommendation. Conversely, for a low-scoring example, we evaluated Toyota. As the pioneer of lean systems, Toyota standardized parts and initially minimized the suppliers due to reduced cost. They scored a 15 out of 30, perfectly aligning with a targeted consolidation recommendation. This demonstrates that our tool effectively matches sourcing strategies to operational realities. Let's look how Chipotle performed on the assessment. Because fresh food is highly vulnerable to spoilage and regional disruptions, they scored a 5 for supply risk. Finding alternative suppliers that meet their strict non-GMO ethical standards is difficult, earning a 4 for market complexity. Since high-quality sourcing is their brand's core competency, a strategic impact of 5 was assigned. For cost disruption, they scored a 4. As we saw when the Mexican avocado imports were temporarily banned, disruptions caused immediate severe stockouts. Geopolitical exposure also scores a 4, as they have heavily relied on international imports. However, they rely on just 53 fresh ingredients, keeping their total category value a moderate at 3. Adding this up gives Chipotle a total score of 25 out of 30. This places them squarely in the high diversification bracket, proving they must use multiple suppliers to protect their highly vulnerable operations. For our lower scoring example, we evaluate Toyota as the pioneer of the lean production system. First, for supply risk, they scored a low 2 because they keep their supplier distances short and buy materials locally. Second, for market complexity, is a minimal 1. Toyota purposefully standardizes parts and minimizes their number of suppliers due to reducing control difficulties. Third, strategic impact scores a maximum of 5. This is because lean partners are so tightly linked and single supplier failure can quickly affect the whole supply chain. Fourth, cost of disruption also scores a 5. With virtually no inventory buffers, these fragile chains face extreme costs if a single node breaks down. Fifth, the total category value is 1, as Toyota uses single sourcing to consolidate their spending. Finally, geopolitical exposure is a 1. Buying exactly where they manufacture significantly reduces their exposure to international tariffs. Adding this up gives Toyota a total score of 15 out of 30, triggering a targeted consolidation recommendation. This perfectly validates our tool, matching Toyota's real-world strategy from a highly integrated, consolidated partnership. This concludes our presentation. Thank you so much for watching, and most importantly, thank you, Dr. Day. We appreciate all you have done for us this semester. We hope that you enjoyed this presentation, and we appreciate all the passion and lessons that you have taught us in both supply chain and life. Thank you for an amazing class and an amazing learning experience. This is just our source page.